When we talk about tapping, the first thing that comes to mind is Eruption and Eddie Van Halen. And that song was recorded in 1978. But actually, the first recorded example of tapping in rock music dates back to 1971. And it's a section from the solo of the musical box by Genesis, played by Steve Hackett, and it was just a couple of bars long. A few seconds of tapping from the first track of this album from 1971, Nursery Crime by Genesis. But right from the start of the third track, we can already hear a more complex example of tapping. Working in harmony with the keyboards, Steve plays an ascending triplet arpeggio that is a lot more natural to play on a keyboard than with the conventional technique on the guitar. And this is probably one of the reasons why Steve developed this technique, even though he said he had already tried it before Genesis. Working along with keyboards and having to play parts and solos that Tony Banks wrote at a time that Genesis was still looking for a guitar player surely inspired Steve Hackett to work on this technique that enabled him to play keyboards part on the guitar in a way that was both simple and very effective. And the guitar part is played here on the 6th string and starts from C minor. This is an example of tapping that was recorded at least 7 years before Van Halen's debut album. And even Eddie admitted that Steve was one of the guitar players that inspired him to develop and explore this technique. Surely Eddie took it to a whole new level of complexity and creativity over the years, and also being a guitar hero, playing in a rock band, his work had a better chance to be recognized and appreciated. While Steve was in a band where the guitar was important, but it often had to fight for space with the keyboard that were predominant, while he was just a newcomer in the band. But besides who invented what and who influenced whom, I just wanted to compare the way that this technique was used in two completely different styles, and also see what strategies could work in both cases. So in the end, who invented tapping, Steve or Eddie? Actually, none of them, because this technique had already been used in classical music, and some say that 200 years ago, Paganini used to do some kind of tapping with his violin bow. In the 20th century, a few jazz guitar players recorded albums and performed live using this technique, but not a lot of people knows about these early examples. This is also true for an Italian guitar player, Vittorio Camardese, who in the 1960s performed on national TV using with ease a very intricate tapping technique. And on a classical guitar too. He was a doctor, not a professional player. He said he taught himself to play and didn't really know where this thing came from because he always used to play like that. But not a lot of people remember this video, and it remained buried in the archives for 20 years, so it couldn't really have influenced any English or American rock musician, especially since it was coming from Italy. But let's get back to Steve and the intro to the giant Hogweed. The part is quite simple. It's all ascending triplets, and you can see that this starts from the C minor arpeggio. And we move the tapping finger of our right hand between these two frets. We do this for the first two bars. And then the part goes on, moving just the two fingers from the left hand and leaving the right hand in place. And this is a harmonic device that Genesis used a lot when they composed their songs, keeping one note of the chord fixed and moving the other two to get some interesting harmonic progressions. This is G major. The next chord we play is a B flat minor. We add the 6th and the 7th. Here we play an F9, where the high G is the 9th. We move just one finger. We get F minor 9. And then G with this nice octave tapping. So we go down one fret each time. So we get this chord sequence that makes a very interesting chord progression. just by using this little trick of moving one finger or two fingers at a time. We can find the same trick when we look at Eruption, even though in this case we got an ascending movement, and we play triplets starting from B minor. We just move the right hand finger so that we play a G major over B, so first inversion. The next one is A dominant 7th over C sharp, A major, D major. We don't really need to see the whole thing. I'll put a link to the tab in the description so you can see the harmonic structure. So we see that Eddie used the same trick, moving one or two fingers at a time to get all the chords that make up the harmonic progression of the track. Let's get back to Steve and see how in just a couple of years, in 1973, on Selling England by the Pound, he used tapping in a more sophisticated way, not just playing triplets, but also using open strings and more interesting patterns, like the one in the solo from Dancing with the Moonlit Knight. So here we switch from triplets to groups of 16th notes. You tap the first of every four. The first part of the solo is playing an A7 chord, or more precisely an A7 arpeggio, and the open string E is making it a second inversion. So E, G, A, C sharp. And then we add D as a fourth. In the second part it plays the same kind of pattern. Then it closes the lick in a different and interesting way. Tapping several times with the right hand and using the tapping finger almost as if it were a pick and playing all these grace notes. And then we got another interesting section. We play C on the third string and then bend it up 1/2 step. We tap an octave higher, then pull off to a G. We can find some of these elements in Spanish Fly, a song that Eddie recorded on classical guitar, and here we can find a nice combination of sextuplets and open strings. Here we got a G sus4 arpeggio using an open string. We play the same pattern on the next string, the fourth string. Then on the next string we play the same grace notes as before. It's the same technique that Steve used before. There's one last example of Steve that I wanted to look at from his first solo album from '75. There's nothing really new from a technical standpoint, but it shows how he was able to create very dramatic and interesting atmosphere using tapping. In the first part, we play a B minor arpeggio in triplets. And then, keeping the same tempo, we play in 16th, adding an open string to play a G. Now we play 4 notes per beat. We use the same technique and we move just one finger at a time to get the different chords and arpeggios. Here we add an E to get a G6th. And here we add an augmented fourth to get a Lydian sound. I call it a fourth because in the next passage we play a fifth. And even in this last example, we can see how Steve used this technique in a very interesting way in the early 70s. And this concludes a little trip back to the origins of tapping in rock. I could have mentioned many more examples, but this was also a way to explore and analyze the styles of two guitar players that really inspired me and were a big influence on my playing and on my style. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this little trip back in time and if there are more examples that you think are essential in the development of tapping in the early 70s, even from other players. And this is all for now. Click like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next video.